Welcome to the FarmBits podcast.
FarmBits is proudly produced by the Nebraska Digital Agriculture team and hosted by students at the University of Nebraska.
The FarmBits podcast comes to you each week to discuss the trends, the realities, and the value of digital agriculture.
Through interviews with experts, producers, and innovators from across the agriculture industry, we hope that you step away from each episode with new practical knowledge of digital agriculture technology.
Hello, FarmBits followers, and welcome to another episode of the FarmBits podcast. I'm José Cesario.
And I'm Katie Bathke, and we are glad to have you with us as we continue exploring Nebraska Extension and the OnFarm Research Network.
Today, we are joined by Water and Integrated Cropping System Extension Educator, Nate Dorsey.
Through the OnFarm Research Network, Nate works with producers to increase efficiency in cropping systems by adopting new technologies.
With that in mind, let's hear more from Nate. Thank you very much for being here, Nate Dorsey. It's a pleasure for us to have you sharing some knowledge about the Nebraska Extension with us. I will start with the first question here. So please share a little bit about your education and professional background, as well as what are you doing right now in the Nebraska Extension?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I didn't really grow up in agriculture. Agriculture found me a little bit later. I didn't necessarily have any plans to have a career in agriculture. So I actually studied environmental science for my bachelor's degree, which I completed at Brigham Young University in Utah. And I graduated and I started working for a soil and water conservation district in Virginia, which is where I actually grew up. And I really loved the opportunity to be outside. I enjoyed working with farmers every day and putting my coursework to use, so to speak. I had a lot of coursework in soil science in my undergraduate program. So I actually really loved it. And I went back and talked to an advisor of mine at BYU, and he recommended that I consider possibly a graduate school, specifically in the area of agronomy, with my interest in soils and kind of my background working with farmers. So he put me in touch with someone who was looking for a student at Kansas State University, and I applied and got in. So I went to K-State. I really loved my time in Kansas. My research there was on nitrogen use efficiency in winter wheat. So again, I really loved being outside, doing research, working with equipment, working with my hands, and then really learning a lot more about agriculture. And that's really where I would say I developed a strong passion for the industry. So I graduated. I was married. I had one child at the time, so was really looking at starting my career in the agriculture industry. So I started in the seed industry initially, actually working in Hawaii. So I moved from Kansas. I moved my family to Hawaii. We lived there for a little while and absolutely loved it. Working in agriculture in Hawaii is kind of like the best of both worlds, I guess you could say.
Oh my God.
Working in the industry, but also in paradise was amazing.
Yeah.
So it was a great place to start my career. I really loved it. But I also had some, I would say, just working more in the agriculture industry, I developed also an interest in precision agriculture. So I ended up moving from Hawaii to North Dakota and started working for a large John Deere dealership there as a agronomist initially, and then had an opportunity to advance and then start leading precision agriculture teams for that John Deere dealership. So I led a team of precision ag consultants in North Dakota and Minnesota for a couple of years. That dealership then moved me down to Arizona. So then I also supervised another team of precision agriculture consultants there that helped farmers in Arizona and California. And then had the opportunity to come to Nebraska, come back to the Midwest, working for a large irrigation manufacturer here in Nebraska. And my role was global research and development. So leading research and development of agriculture technology, specifically throughout the world. So I had the opportunity to travel a lot to places like South Africa, and then also lead projects in Brazil and Australia, and all throughout North America. So I've had a really great career in precision agriculture and agriculture technology. I've loved it, but I've also have I would say a passion for educating others and specifically working with growers. And so that's really what led me to joining Extension. So I'm actually a pretty new Extension educator. Joined the university in February of this year, but I love the opportunity to work in my area in agronomy and precision agriculture, but also really be focused on education and enabling growers.
Wow, that's impressive. Seems that you got a lot of experience and you like to travel a lot, right?
I do, yeah. I've been all over.
Yeah.
That's really neat. I really like how you kind of told us about how you got into agriculture. I think that story is pretty similar to how I kind of came about it as well. So thank you for sharing that. I guess our next question would be, for those who may not be familiar with the extension system, what is your job as an extension educator, and more specifically as a water and integrated cropping systems extension educator?
Sure. So I would say, being an extension educator is a pretty unique position in agriculture. For Nebraska Extension, I would say the focus of extension educators is one, to share research-based information that's being generated from the university. So the university has a lot of really talented researchers in Lincoln, but also throughout the state that are focused on cutting edge research, whether that's genetics or technology. And so one focus of being an extension is helping share with farmers what we're learning as a university from that research, and translating that in a way that farmers can understand, but also take action on their farms to improve their operations and their business. That's one aspect. I guess on the flip side of that too is helping share some of that farmer experience, maybe things that they're struggling with, and sharing that with those researchers to help guide some of the research projects that they're focused on, that they're working on, so they can really be having things that are relevant to farmers and what their needs actually are. The other is organizing educational programs. So one role of extension educators is to hold clinics and workshops and other types of large events to help share information with a broad audience. That can be the public, that can be farmers, policymakers, whatever the case might be. And then a third component of that as well is doing some on-farm research with local farmers as well. So not only are we doing research, you have researchers and professors at the university that have projects, but on-farm research is more of I would say more targeted and relevant. So and working more one-on-one with a farmer with a specific question or thing that they're interested in, and helping them do that in a way that's actually statistically sound, so they can have good results and information based off of that. So that's another thing that I myself and other extension educators focus on.
That's amazing, Nate. That's amazing. And it's really cool how the Nebraska Extension has these connections with the growers around, and how they can deal with the solutions depending on each area, right? And so with that, would you mind describing a little bit about your area, your region, that you cover as extension educator? Like, what crops have the farmers been working there? It is more dry land, irrigated. What kind of soils you guys are dealing, if it's like more sandy soils? And how is more like, does it rain a lot there? Could you describe a little bit for us about that?
Sure. So I guess I should mention that I'm the extension educator for Dodge and Washington counties in Nebraska. So we're eastern Nebraska. I would say that it's pretty traditional corn and soybeans. There's not a whole lot of diversity. And that's one thing that I know that as University Extension and the university in general is really trying to encourage growers to consider thinking outside of the box. What other types of opportunities we have to diversify. The corn and soybeans are the primary crops in my area. In terms of irrigation, there's a decent amount of irrigation, more than I would have expected. I would say that's probably about 80% dry land and 20% center pivot irrigation in my area. There is pretty good precipitation. So I would say that on average in this part of the state, there's 28 to 30 inches of rainfall or precipitation per year. So the land that is irrigated, those pivots will run when it's dry or really hot in the summertime, but they're primarily there as I would say crop insurance, making sure that we have water when you really need it.
Yep.
In terms of soils, I would say that there's not a whole lot of diversity. I would say in my area there is some change in topography. We have some lowland areas kind of along the Platte River, which are more of like a silty clay loam, I would say. Pretty rich, great agricultural soils. Then we also have some topography going into more of some kind of like loess hills that would go more towards the Missouri River. I would say more like a silt loam type of soil there. So they're all in all, I would say great. This area is blessed with really great soil.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I guess off of your UNL personal profile, there are some keywords associated with your name. Those are irrigation and water management, soil health and sustainability, crop production, and pest management. Can you explain to us how you work with or relate to some of those things?
Sure. I would say that as an extension educator, myself and most of the other extension educators in the state probably do have areas that they specialize in based off of their education, but also professional experience, whether that was gained in industry or what they've done during their time at the university. But overall, a lot of the extension educators try to be as well-rounded as possible. So you have growers that will ask you questions. You might get multiple questions in the same day about weeds or insects or pasture management or things around finances, business plans. So you have to really know a lot about agriculture to be able to answer those questions, and also know where to go when you don't have the answer right away, but you need to do some research. So myself, I would say that obviously I do have a lot of experience working with equipment, whether that's large John Deere equipment, for example, or irrigation equipment. But I also have a lot of interest in other topics as well. So things like soil health and sustainability, I would say, are more personal interests of mine. I have an environmental science background, and I worked for a soil and water conservation district. So that's, I would say, an interest of mine in working with growers who are also like-minded and want to try to make some changes in those areas. But then also things like pest management. The extension educators in the state are expected to deliver all the educational programming around pest management. So things like having being a certified pesticide applicator, that's required by the state of Nebraska if you're applying restricted pesticides. So the extension educators are also doing all of that training for farmers and landowners in the state. So being familiar with those types of topics is also really important.
That's amazing, Nate. So you also mentioned about Prevost work with agriculture, technology, and in industry as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the position and your role with them?
Sure. So my industry experience has primarily been with equipment, and in doing that, I've had the opportunity to learn a lot. So I mentioned that growing up, I wasn't necessarily that involved in agriculture. So I feel like a lot of my career has actually been, I've been almost at a disadvantage in some ways, where a lot of my coworkers and others that I worked with, they grew up in agriculture. Their families still farmed, and in the evenings or on the weekends during the busy season, a lot of them would go back to the farm and help. And so everything that I know about agriculture and equipment and farming in general has been things that I've had to build and learn after going to school and completing my undergraduate degree. So getting hands-on with equipment, riding along with farmers, talking with coworkers, and just taking every opportunity to learn from others is really how I've learned everything about the industry. So there's only so much that you can really learn from coursework, as an undergraduate or as a master's or a graduate student. A lot of it is that I've learned, at least, has just been by experience, by asking questions, not being afraid to do that, and even learning from my customers or farmers that I have the opportunity to work with.
That's really neat. Thanks for sharing that with us. I guess from your industry experience, can you tell us what was maybe the most valuable information that you found so far?
I would say probably developing relationships. Yeah, so that's probably the biggest thing. So agriculture is a relationship industry, and everything is based on relationships, and a lot of those relationships are lifelong. So you think about a farmer they typically have a relationship, for example, with an equipment dealer or a seed salesperson. That's usually a lifelong relationship. So it's building those types of relationships with farmers and the constituents that I've had the opportunity to serve as an extension educator. Learning how to do that is really what I've gained, or I've learned how to do that from my experience in industry and seeing how others have been able to cultivate those types of relationships that are really based on trust, to be able to build a relationship that lasts, a lifetime. So that's something that I try to do every day by providing, science-based, research-based information to farmers, and really being there when they have a question that they need help with.
Yeah, I agree that relationships are key to succeed. And it seems that you gave like kind of a turn on that, right? So are you able to share what made you want to become an extension educator after being in the industry?
Sure. So obviously, industry has its perks, and usually higher salaries and things like that you would see working at a university as an educator. And I love my time in industry, and I learned a lot and gained a lot of really valuable experiences. But I've always wanted to be an educator, and I would say that most of the other extension educators at the university feel the same way and just have a natural inclination to share information and help others. So that's, I would say, my motivation to be an extension educator. I really have a passion for learning, but then also turning around and sharing those things that I'm learning with others and helping them improve, their business, their operation, and also addressing things that they need help with.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really interesting and kind of take from going from the industry to extension education. And I think you really brought out some good points there. I guess our next question for you is probably more focused back towards how we're kind of using precision agriculture and digital. And I guess what we were wondering is, what is your perspective on kind of the forward and the future of digital and precision agriculture?
So I think we're at a really interesting time in precision agriculture. And I think that so one of the things I'm looking forward to the most and seeing what and how it develops is more around automation. I think that's something that's going to be really interesting to watch. I would say over the next 10 years, we will see a lot of changes from equipment manufacturers, whether that's tractors, combine sprayers, to even irrigation. So, what does that look like? And having more autonomous equipment, from there's going to be some legal challenges, also some production challenges. There's be some pretty big shifts for farmers in terms of how they manage the logistics of that, transporting equipment between fields, for example, servicing equipment that might be more electric versus fossil fuel based. Then all of the data that will be collected from those machines and sensor technology that comes along with that. So I think that's going to be an interesting change in the industry, and I think it's going to be interesting. We'll have to watch and see what happens, because I think it's going to be a big culture shift for farmers, but also businesses start taking over. So I would say that following along that 10-year path, kind of around that I talked about with automation, I think is also the path that we'll see more people from the younger generation taking more of a lead in terms of agriculture technology and what that looks like.
So I guess from the people that you do, or the producers that you do see kind of taking a hold of some of these technologies and wanting to implement them, from your perspective, how do you see research like this being implemented on grower operations?
So I would say that the research that the university does in particular is going to be important. So that I would say that farmers really trust the University of Nebraska, and that's a great position to be in. And the role of extension is helping share a lot of that research with farmers as to help them make those types of decisions. So that research might say, yes, there's a benefit to doing this new technology, or no, there's not. But what does that look like in terms of, I would say even if it's a no, there's always something to be learned. And that always guides research I would say extends the research question. And so then, we start digging into more things and more variables. So I would say that for a lot of the technology to really be successfully adopted, farmers want to know that it's going to work. And the way that we would do that is by having, professors and others that are focused on research doing some of that, extension sharing that information, but then also extension working with farmers on-farm research. So almost holding a farmer's hands through that research process on their own fields so they can see the benefits of that technology for them.
Yeah, and I think that's the cool part of this Nebraska Extension program, that they can work with the growers, because each field would be different, right? So, and see if like this technology will be helpful for the grower or not.
Mm-hmm.
And based on that, like, what are the most excited about moving forward with the Nebraska Extension and the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network?
So I would say that the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network is a pretty unique research program that the University of Nebraska has. One in that it's very formalized. So we have a publication that we put out every year that has the results of on-farm research conducted throughout the state. These are all projects that are done in partnership with growers. So it's a pretty unique program. And it actually, whenever I have a conversation with a farmer about doing on-farm research, I always frame it from the perspective of, I want to find a topic that's of interest to you. So that's going to answer a question that you have. I don't want to tell you what to research. I want you to tell me what's a challenge or topic that you have, or what types of things are seed sales companies or fertilizer companies trying to sell you, that we can actually do a trial together and figure out whether there's a benefit to this new variety or this new biological product, for example. And then, so that whatever on-farm research that I'm doing isn't just a benefit to the university, which it is, but also directly answering or benefiting the farmer that I have the opportunity to work with as well. So in that way, I think that it's generating useful information for that farmer that we're working with directly, but then also all that research information that we're generating with them can then be shared statewide to help other farmers who might have the same question or are curious about the same topic.
I think that's such an interesting way how you're kind of connecting with the growers and with the industry as well, and doing it not only for the benefit of them, but for the benefit of growers as a whole. So I think that's a really neat perspective. I guess our next question, kind of leading into that, would be, because of our focus this season on Nebraska Extension, we want to hear from you what you think makes Nebraska Extension different and what sets it apart from extension programs in other states.
So I've had the opportunity, as working in industry, to work in different states, and I've been able to engage with the extension educators and programs in those states as well. And a lot of states have really great extension programs and great employees that are doing, really interesting things that are benefiting their stakeholders. But I would say that Nebraska is unique in several ways. One, I would say probably the most, clear way that stood out to me, at least, was that educators are not assigned to just one county in Nebraska. The structure of the extension in the state is more around accountability regions, is what we call them. So a lot of our extension educators are assigned to multiple counties. And so, for myself, for example, I have Dodge and Washington counties, but we have educators that are assigned to 8 to 12 counties. So they have a pretty large area that does a couple things. One, it makes sure that we have someone that can answer questions and help producers in all counties throughout the state. So that, for example, if an educator or someone were to leave a county, sometimes it can be really difficult to hire an extension educator in some of the more rural areas of the state. So that we always have someone that's assigned to answer those questions and to help the stakeholders in that area. Two, I would say that it also opens up some opportunity for more funding for each educator. Because they're not just, one county, we have larger areas that we're focused on. I think that does provide some more funds for doing extension programs, things like workshops and clinics, but also things like research programs that we can conduct in those areas that are maybe not as common when you're only assigned to one county and have more limited amount of funds that are available to you. I would say that the second is that University of Nebraska, or the third, I guess, would be that the University of Nebraska has a lot of support internally for extension. So that would be, the faculty and professors that might be based in Lincoln or some of the research centers throughout the state. I would say really value extension. A lot of times they often have extension appointments as well. So they have some responsibilities in the area of extension. But then we also have a lot of support from, finance teams and other teams that help us, apply for grants, things like that are really helpful, that provide a lot of support for the educators that are throughout the state.
Yeah, that's great. And I would like to add one more question on the top of this one, because you mentioned in the beginning of the interview some experience on the background that you had in South Africa, Brazil, Australia. How do you see these countries in comparison to US in terms of digital eggs adoptions?
It's I would say digital ag adoption in a lot of countries is not as far behind as I think that we would often think. And there's a lot of really great farmers and very knowledgeable people in a lot of other countries that I've had the opportunity to work with. Some of who know way more than I do about equipment and technology. And so it's always, I would say a pleasure to work with people in some of these other areas as well. And I think that in some ways, because of their infrastructure limitations, they're maybe not as well connected. Maybe they don't have, as good of roads and reliable power or cell connections, things like that. They're often, very creative and inventive in coming up with solutions to those types of problems, which we don't always have in North America or the United States. And so in some ways, I would say there's even more of an entrepreneurial spirit and even more innovation that sometimes happens in those areas because of the environment that they're in and that they're more limited. So they have to be really creative to find some solutions to problems.
Thank you for that perspective. I guess that's really interesting to me because I've never thought about it from a global view. So thank you for that.
With that, we would like to ask you, where can our listeners go to learn more if they are interested or if they have more questions arise about anything we talked today? Do you have a website or something that you would like to share?
Sure. So I would say the university has a lot of different resources. Of course, FarmBits is one resource. That's great. I listen to the podcast episodes myself. And always enjoy learning new information. From the extension side, there are a few different resources. So one is CropWatch. That's kind of I would say, a more informal source of information, almost like a blog. So if you go to cropwatch.unl.edu, there's a really great website. So I would say regular articles are published there, usually about emerging topics. So things like, this last week we had a freeze. How do you evaluate your corn for freeze damage? That was a recent topic that was just published there. Because of some of the cooler temperatures we had in Nebraska this spring. But also topics around weed management or emerging insect problems. There's also the CropWatch podcast. I would say for more formal publications that Extension publishes, extension.unl.edu is probably the source there. There is a button on that website that says Find an Answer, and there's some really great resources there to find publications like Neb Guides that are more peer-reviewed. So they're more formalized. Typically, there's multiple extension educators or professors at the university that put those together around topics like soil fertility, insect or weed disease management, topics like that, that are really great resources that individuals have spent a lot of time putting together. And then I would say a third that myself and a few other extension educators are working on specifically around technology is we're launching a new program called Smart Machinery that will be based solely around technology, precision agriculture. So that will be smartmachinery.farm, and that will have a lot of information around equipment and irrigation, drones, pretty much anything around agriculture technology. So that's a pretty exciting program that we're just getting off the ground this season.
Okay, thank you for sharing that with us. I have one last question for you, and it is, do you have any advice or words of wisdom for producers in any location that might want to get involved in the extension systems, whether that be in Nebraska or other states?
Yeah, so I would say that extension educators, we really love the opportunity to work with producers throughout the state. So I would say that if producers want to get involved, I would say that the extension educators would welcome that with open arms. And there's a few different reasons why. I would say that extension educators, are really great facilitators. We like to organize and have programs, but I would say that farmers in general, in my experience working with farmers throughout the country and in Nebraska, they relate much better to other farmers than they do to extension educators or researchers at the university. They value the information that we have, but I would say that they trust the information more from experience that they hear from other farmers. So I would love to have it, and I'm sure that more educators as part of Nebraska Extension would also like it if we had more farmers that were willing to participate in those types of programs to share their experiences, whether that's adopting new technology or experiences with pest management or weed management, whatever the case might be, to share those experiences with other growers. I think that creates a much stronger learning experience for others to see what their neighbors are doing.
That's amazing, Nate. That's great. And is there any specific tools that you guys been promoting on that region, on your county, that the growers might be looking for?
I don't think that we've really launched or have much of a centralized effort yet, but I think that we've done a lot of formal programs. So, where people come into the office or a meeting space and we have a presentation. But I think that we also want to try to do more informal type of learning opportunities as well. So that might include something like, there's an emerging insect in Nebraska, soybean gall midge, that had a lot of concern throughout the state. So watching for that insect, but could there be an opportunity to have something like almost like a impromptu field tour? Hey, we found it at this field. This farmer is willing to let everyone come in, take a look, so you can see what the symptoms look like. You can see what this looks like, so that you know what to watch for. And that farmer can then share his experience in terms of, this is what I've seen. This is how I've been trying to manage it. Here's what's worked. Here's what hasn't worked. So I think that having opportunities like that, more informal learning opportunities, is something that myself and a lot of the other educators would really like to pursue. It takes having good relationships and farmers that also want to be able to share their experiences with others.
Thank you very much to Nate Dorsey for taking the time to join this episode of the FarmBits podcast. It's really exciting to see the efforts between growers and Nebraska Extension on advancing agriculture with digital technologies.
I would have to agree. I love Nate's unique perspective on the adoption of such technologies within agriculture today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to sharing another Nebraska Extension story with you next week on FarmBits.
We would like to thank Nebraska Extension for their support of this podcast and their commitment to providing high-quality informational material to members of the agricultural community in Nebraska and beyond.
The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the views of Nebraska Extension or the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of FarmBits.